My name is Emma Benison. I am the Manager of Strategic Engagement, Disability Employment. I have been blind since birth and totally blind, so I have no vision. I was born 13 weeks premature, so that's the reason for my blindness. I'm quite comfortable talking about that. And more recently, I have acquired a mental health issue, and so I'm in the somewhat unusual position of knowing what it's like to experience both a visible and invisible disability. Well, definitely an employer who, like LWB, actually is supportive of people with disability, and I don't just mean talking about that. I mean actually, employing people with disability and an employer who actually walks the talk, particularly when it comes to employing people with disability at all levels of the organisation. I think it's really important that we have people employed across the breadth of positions and responsibilities in any organisation that's serious about this issue. Yeah, I mean, I think it's hugely important. It's one thing to have, and it's wonderful. I'm not diminishing the importance of having people with disability on the front line in organisations. That's hugely important because it needs to be visible to everybody, at all levels. But I think it's also really important that our voices are heard at the decision-making tables, whether that be at board or executive level, so that we can actually have the voices of people with disability as part of whatever strategy we're creating, because otherwise it's inevitable that we're going to be excluded, not necessarily intentionally, but even unintentionally. Well, I think it's the breadth of the plan. When people think about life without barriers and an access, inclusion and employment plan, they probably think generally about our work internally and ensuring that we increase the numbers of people with disability in employment across the organisation. And that certainly is a target. There's a target in the plan that we have 15% of people with disability working in roles across the organisation at a range of different levels and seniority and responsibility, and that's fantastic. And I think that's a great aspiration for any organisation to have, but particularly one that actually is working with people with disability amongst other groups. But beyond that, I think what's really exciting is that Life Without Barriers wants to take a leadership role in terms of empowering people with disability and the community services sector to work in partnership to create employment opportunities in that sector. I mean, if the community services sector, the sector that supports people with disability to live full and productive lives, if we as a sector can't get employment right, then really I just don't know what hope there is for the rest of Australia, for corporate Australia, for government, for any other sector of our community to get this right. So what really excites me about this is that Life Without Barriers is positioning itself as a true leader to actually set an example for the rest of the sector and for the rest of Australia to follow, and that's why I really wanted to come on board and work with the many other extraordinary people in this organisation to try to help make that happen and position our organisation in this way. It's very exciting. The employment rate of people with disability has not changed in 30 years, and that is a sad indictment on our society. And I think Life Without Barriers is really well positioned to move the needle, and we should. We have a responsibility as a leader in this sector to take responsibility and move that. And what's really exciting is that our board and our executive team is really behind that. I think the really, really significant barrier that we have to break down is the attitudinal one. And I think a lot of the challenge that we face in terms of attitudes towards employing people with disability are unconscious. There's a lot of unconscious bias, but most of all, I think there's a lot of fear. I don't think that people sit at the table and think, oh, we don't want to employ people with disability. I don't think that's how it works. I think people think, leaders think, oh, we want to get it right. We don't want to make a mistake. We want to make sure that we get it right. And sometimes there's so much fear of getting it wrong that people just don't do it. And my message is that, we're just people. We're just human beings. And if you just, sit down with us, have an honest conversation and ask us what we actually need and what our aspirations are, rather than making assumptions about what we're capable of or what you might think we're capable of. Then there's just so much diversity and so much skill and talent within our community of people with disability that can be tapped into. Well, the first thing I would say is that disclosure is a really personal thing, and I'm not going to judge anybody for feeling uncomfortable about disclosing. But what I would say is that for those people who perhaps are feeling uncomfortable about disclosing, I think it would be wonderful. I would like to hear from those people about why they feel uncomfortable and what we can do to make people feel more comfortable. What can we do to make the culture a safer one for people to disclose? But also I would challenge people to think about how, by disclosing, they might also encourage other people, particularly people who are at management level. What impact might disclosing, if you get to a point of being comfortable to do that, might that have on the rest of your team? And what influence might you be able to have across the organisation by ticking that box? Now, again, I don't judge anybody because it's a very personal decision, but I think often people dwell on the negatives of disclosure. If I disclose, will people think that I'm not as capable? Will I lose my job? And will people view me differently? My experience of disclosure personally is that often it has led to people feeling like they can disclose. I mean, I've worked in CEO roles, and often when I have disclosed, people have come to me and said, you've given me the confidence to do that too. So I think we need to flip the script a little bit on disclosure, and for people who are at that point in their I was going to say journey, but I hate that word, but in their evolution, then I think we need to think about, well, what are the positives? There are some positives to disclosure, but people have to feel comfortable and supported before they can do that. So I'd like to hear from the people who might maybe feel uncomfortable about, what can we do to make people feel safe in this organisation and beyond. I do sometimes get quite concerned when people ask me questions like, how do you cook? Or do your children look after you? Particularly when they were 2. And they'd, just been throwing a tantrum, and then somebody would come along and say, oh, it's wonderful that your child is looking after you. So I do get a bit worried about those sorts of views. But again, it goes back to my earlier point, and I understand that it's just that we're not visible enough in society, and that's why disability employment is such a passion of mine, because it makes us more visible, and it makes it enables people to talk to us and understand that we're just human beings like everybody else, with families and challenges and trying to pay a mortgage and all of those things. So I think I'm really open to being asked whatever question people want to ask me, as long as it's respectful. I am constantly surprised by the number of people who, when I in the past have said that I was the CEO of an organisation, have just been gobsmacked by that and have been really concerned about how on earth I would do that. I think that's why we really have to change the situation. We have to have more people with disability employed in leadership roles in our organisations across the board.